Welcome to the Champion Mindset Collective podcast. Today we have an incredible journey to share with you, and I'm your host, Anthony Dyer, and I'm so grateful that you're here listening to this podcast episode or watching it if you're watching the video. Would love for you to share this episode with your friends, your family, and your workmates. And if you haven't already done so, please follow the podcast so that you don't miss any future episodes and we can get this podcast out to the wider community. Today, it's my absolute pleasure and privilege to welcome you all to this podcast interview. Daniel Tolson is today's guest, and he is a former Australian champion athlete and regarded as Asia's #1 business coach, with more than 10,000 case studies on business leaders. Co-led a team of 17,500 cabin crew at Emirates Airlines and has had more than 25,000 leaders apply his ideas to make an impact. With 90 seconds using a new breakthrough technologies, Daniel can show you how you can become a better leader. Let's welcome Daniel Tolson to the Champion Mindset Collective podcast. Welcome, Daniel.
Anthony, thank you for a lovely introduction. Very nice words. Thank you.
You're welcome. So, Daniel, tell us a little bit about who Daniel was when he was little, and what's the journey that you've been through to get to where you are today, and how you help people.
Well, if I was ever to get a tattoo, it would be of a Japanese proverb, and it would say, "Get knocked down 7 times, get back up 8." So who Daniel is, he started his life as definitely a boxing bag. I was diagnosed with linear sequential learning disability, and as part of my disability, I was visually impaired. I couldn't see correctly. I was also tone deaf. So I didn't have the full range of hearing. I couldn't hear the different nuances in people's tone of voice. They sent me to musical therapy to try to fix that, and I still couldn't tell the difference in the tones. And what was happening was my hips were out of alignment, my spine was twisted, and the cranial plates in the skull had never formed properly. So they were creating a lot of pressure on the left and right hemisphere of the brain, and that was creating the visual impairment. That was creating the auditory impairment. And then everything below started to collapse. The lungs collapsed and I had bronchitis. I had bronchial tubes collapsing. I had every single asthma puffer you could imagine. So the early years for me was being a boxing bag for life. And psychologists will tell you that most people spend 50 years of their life trying to get over the first year. Well, I didn't wait for the therapy. They just put me in therapy really young. And whilst all the other kids were playing sports, I was seeing the psych. I was having therapy. So that's how my early days started, and no tattoos yet. But if I was to get one, it would say fall down 7 times, get back up 8.
Absolutely. I have something similar, but not as chronic as yours. But I was born, I was 15 days old, 3 months preem, and mum had lost 3 kids, one before me, 1 alternative kids. And so I was the second one to come along, and I had a kidney removed at birth. So you can imagine being a 3-month preem, 15 days old, my kidney would have been the size of a kidney bean, and had that removed. Now at 53, I've survived on 1 kidney. And, absolutely, I agree with you. I believe get knocked down as many times as possible and just keep getting back up. And that's the sign of being a true champion.
It is. And it's fascinating that you mentioned that, because a lot of people, they don't consider the time in their mother's womb as part of their emotional life journey. And this prenatal stress that the mother experiences is directly passed on to the child, and it impacts the fetal's development. So if your mother has lost 3 children before you were born, then the stress is high, and that impacts the growth of the fetus.
Yeah.
Now, the other thing is,
there was actually 1 before me and then 1 alternate ones after me. Yeah.
One after.
Yeah.
And so these things can get, these limitations can be printed upon us genetically. And when we get to talking about the technology later on, we can actually see these things occurring whilst we're in our mother's womb. We've got the technology to review that.
Wow. I'm looking forward to that. Let's kick into some questions around. Tell us a little bit about your journey struggling with the learning disabilities and also the physical challenges as a child to become a champion. athlete and also successful as a business coach.
Mm. Well, for me at school, my learning disabilities were invisible. So the teachers would say, Daniel, you're not paying attention. But they couldn't see the confusion that was in here. I would look at the board and I could see what they wrote. I had 20/20 vision, but the problem was the visual impairment when it was getting brought inside the mind. Whatever was on the board would get jumbled up here. And then when I'd write it down, it came out in a third language. And when I spoke it, it was in a fourth language and it made absolutely no sense.
Wow.
So the teachers, they think you're stupid. They think you're dumb. They don't know how to handle you. So they just treat you as a troubled student. So that was really hard because I would say to my mum, I'm trying really hard. I'm a good boy. I'm not a bad boy. I don't cause anybody problem. I just can't understand what's on the board. They talk and I don't even understand what they're talking about. I try to repeat it and it makes sense to me, but everybody else is laughing. So there was this immense confusion. And as they started to unpack the learning disability, it was linear sequential learning disability. So most people can learn in an order and sequence, like steps A, B, C, 1, 2, 3. But my mind was working more in a lateral sense. You could give me A, but my mind's going to jump to T. It's going to come back to E. It's going to go to Z. And it's going to get to Z just like everybody else. But it just did it in an unpredictable way. So for many years, it really held me back because I would go into things like computer science and my teacher would say, Daniel, you're not paying attention. Well, the reason I'm not paying attention is because I've already flicked through your training manual here. I've already turned on the computer and I've already figured this thing out and I'm already bored and you can't teach me anything else. I know more than you. And they'd be like, oh, that's a bad attitude. It's not a bad attitude. And so I was always told I wasn't a good student, but I've made millions and millions of dollars working on the internet. And I didn't have to have their textbook because I got it. As soon as I looked at it, my mind went, okay, this is how you do that. And away you go. And then I'd simply get bored. So the big problem with that was because school was so stressful, I developed what's called a psychosomatic illness. And it's when the mind makes the body sick. And I ended up suffering from Epstein-Barr virus and chronic fatigue. So I didn't have to go to school for about 6 months. And by the time I got back to school, the other kids were so far ahead that I just couldn't keep up. So the teacher said, look, you got two options. You can stay and we can repeat you, or you can just move on and get on with your life. So for me, it was good to be able to leave school because I simply just couldn't handle their tests. I couldn't write their essays. So that threw me into the business world. And once I got into the business world, what I realized was I had a lot of social skills. I could talk to people. I could get appointments. I could negotiate a deal. I could earn a commission. And I realized that once I was out of school, all of my life skills actually started to get rewarded. And in the very first 6 months of getting in real estate, I became one of the top 10 salespeople in the country 3 times in a row. And I could generate sales. I could generate appointments. And what I realized, I was probably a little bit more street smart than book smart. And I wasn't getting penalized by customers. Customers would say, Daniel, you're a great young guy. You speak well. You're enthusiastic. You work hard. We want to work with you. They didn't make me sit a test. They didn't make me read back a training system. What they wanted a result. So going through those early experiences, I realized I got to know people really well. I could get along with people and I had to play to those strengths in real estate.
Daniel, tell us about how your experience in the real estate industry at a young age shaped the approach into business and leadership.
Well, my first leader didn't hire me straight away, which was interesting. He said, come and apply for a job. And so I went down to his real estate office and he showed me around. He introduced me to the people that I could potentially work with. And then he gave me a book. And the book was called Who Moved My Cheese? And he said, why don't you go away and read this book and report back? And so I went away, I read the book, called him up, and he said, come back to the office. So I came back to the office and he said, tell me about the book. And I told him all the wonderful things about this book, Who Moved My Cheese. And he said, okay, you enjoyed the book. Here's another book. And so he gave me another book. I went away, and this book was called The Greatest Salesman in Babylon. And I read the book from cover to cover, and I called him up and he said, come back to the office. And he asked me about the book, and I told him all about it. And then he gave me another book and he said, read this book. But this time he wrote a message in the cover and he said, to Danny boy, this is the blueprint of success. And he signed it and he gave it to me. He said, read the book. And so I read the book, came back and he said, how did you like it? I said, I loved it. He said, good. Are you ready to start? And so I'd read all this material and then the training began. So the first day that I walked in the office, he had a plan. He said, this is the first 6 months of you being a support staff. And so what I realized from day one, the moment that I walked in the office, for the first 6 months, I had a plan. And he had a roadmap on exactly how I would succeed as a sales associate. He said, once you do that and get familiar with the area, then we'll put you into sales creating. 6 months later, true to his word, he started me off as a sales creator. He sent me to a training and he said, this is what's going to happen over the next 6 months. He said, you've got to make 500 calls, cold calls a week. Out of those 500, 100 people will pick up the phone. And he said, one person will say, yes, we want to sell our house. He said, they're the numbers. And he said, just dial the numbers. Don't think about it. Just pick up the phone and start calling. He says, once that self-talk kicks in, you'll talk yourself out of it. So I started to dial the numbers. I started to knock on the doors, ring on the bells. And my goal was to have 500 connects a week. Out of those 500, I'd find 100 people, 99 would say no, and one would say yes. And so on the third month, I was already in the top 10 sales creators in the country. And he said, Daniel, this is the plan. You get into here 3 times, you'll make enough money to get a deposit for a house. And once you buy your first house, then we'll put you in sales. Because if you want to take on a responsibility of selling somebody's house, you've got to understand what you have to go through to first buy one. Because if you don't understand that, nobody's going to take you serious. So I worked hard, top 10 sales creators 3 times in a row, made enough money. And then my boss said, we're going to buy a house together. So I'm 19 and a half buying my very first real estate investment property with my leader. And that's the type of leader he was. He would never ask me to do something that he wasn't first prepared to do himself. And so that happened. And then he said, now we're going to put you in sales. And these are your numbers, and this is what you're going to do. He said, just follow the path. He said, just like your real estate property that you bought, just set and forget. This is the roadmap. Just do the do, and you'll get the results. And I followed it. And then in another year and a half, I was buying my second investment property. And he said, see, Daniel, if you just do what successful people do, you will get the same result. He says it doesn't matter what your skin color is, where you're from, doesn't matter if you're uneducated or educated, just do what other successful people do. He said, the best part about you, Daniel, is you don't think much. And I said, is that a compliment? He says, yes, because you don't overthink it, you just do it. And that's what really set me up for success. Was I had a great leader, but he also gave me a template of what other successful people were doing. So I didn't have to rethink it. I didn't have to reinvent the wheel. I just did what other people did, and I got the result. That was it.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. And it comes down to consistency, right? It's that repetition and just keep doing it. And for the listeners out there, if you haven't started, you just need to start. You just need to start, and you just need to take that consistent approach of doing it, repetitive action, and that will build competence and confidence in yourself. So yeah,
100%.
thank you. Yeah, thank you, Daniel.
100%. You just got to keep it simple, and you just follow the formula. And I haven't had any professional lessons in cooking, but I can go down to Woolworths and buy a shaker cake. I can put the water in and the 2 eggs, and I can cook a perfect cake with no lessons. Why? Because it's a proven recipe.
Exactly.
Don't overthink
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
I learned many years ago that people with a higher IQ, it's harder for them to succeed. Sometimes with people with a lower IQ, they don't overthink things.
Mm,
They just do what they're supposed to do, and they don't get caught up in this conscious or rational mind. They just do it. And you'd be surprised. You see some of those people from school who they just put their head down and worked for 20 or 30 years, and now they're multimillionaires. And you
mm,
think to yourself, that person couldn't string a sentence together at school. What's so special about them? Well, they just didn't overthink. They just took the
mm.
action.
Yeah. And it's often that overthinking that stops us from moving forward because we're
Yes, smart
constantly.
people use their intelligence against themselves.
Mm,
Smart people make all of these lists of what they can't do, of all the reasons why things won't work. And they go down the rabbit hole and then they use their intelligence to justify it. They even go to Google and they self-diagnose. The other person's like, well, I can't spell. That's a good thing. I'm not getting caught up in these things called a self-diagnosis. I'll just get busy.
yeah,
Got to be
absolutely.
careful. Be careful with
Absolutely.
your intelligence.
Mm, mm, absolutely. And what we think and what we speak out is, comes into reality. So, we've got to be careful what we say and what we do and what we think. All right. So question I have is around what motivated you to leave the successful career in real estate and pursue wakeboarding? And how did you apply personal development techniques to achieve your goals in the sport?
I got towards the end of 2002 and I wanted more in my life. I had career success, but I wasn't having the sporting success that I wanted. And what led me to real estate was having two major knee reconstructions. So after I left school, 2 years in a row, I busted my posterior cruciate ligament and all the cartilage in my knee. And I really didn't have any money. And my dreams cost money. And I
Mm,
had to find a way to make more money. But unfortunately, you can only become good at one thing at a time. And I put all of my mental and emotional energy into real estate. And I bought a couple of homes because I thought that was the right thing to do. I'd heard this thing about the Aussie dream. And then I realized it's not the Aussie dream, it was the Aussie nightmare. I had to get results to pay bills. And I would find that I was working all of the time whilst my friends were out having fun. I
mm,
was working weekends when they were partying and they were surfing. So I got to the end of my time in real estate and I said, I want more, but I don't know what I want. And so my mum said, why don't you go traveling? I said, well, that sounds like a good idea. So I packed my backpack and I went over to the United Kingdom. And then I quickly went over to Ireland. And when I got to Ireland, I took a job on a dairy farm. And the first night on the dairy farm, I thought the guy I was working for was Hannibal Lecter. He had no teeth, and I'm pretty sure he was going to cut me up and eat me. So I escaped from there and backpacked around Ireland. And then I got back to the UK and I started to work in bars and clubs. I started painting people's homes. I was shoveling the horse shit out of the stables. And then I started to coach wakeboarding at a park just outside of London. And although I didn't have a lot of money, I got a lot of time to think. And I thought to
mm,
myself, what do I want to do with my life? And so I went searching. I really didn't have the answer. I ended up in America and then I got a telephone call to come back to Australia and start a business. So I came back and I started a business and I built a very successful clothing business, eventually having 50 shops across Australia and New Zealand stocking my goods. I started to create sports movies and I had the best selling movie in Australia. I had more than 600 people come to the launch night. And so I had a lot of fun doing that, but I wanted more with my life. And then I got another opportunity to go to Dubai. And an English gentleman said, Daniel, would you come to Dubai and help us start a water sports facility? He says, we've got a waterway worth $6 billion all to ourselves. He said, the Sheikh's going to buy us boats. He's going to pay you a lot of money. Just come over and teach wakeboarding. And so I left my business. I went over and started to coach water sports in Dubai. And again, I found myself in the same position. Had a lot of time. I was sitting on the beach, but I wanted more. I didn't want to be out in the elements for the rest of my life. And then eventually I ended up at Emirates Airlines, and that's where I started my leadership journey.
Mm. Yeah, that would have been an interesting journey working at Emirates.
It was.
Yeah.
When I went to Dubai in 2007, it was quiet. It was like a ghost town. I went just at the start of Ramadan in 2007, and I would have to hide in the fire stairwell eating my sandwich because you couldn't eat in public. The roads were quiet. I was given a car and I could drive up and down Sheikh Zayed Road and never get caught in traffic. It was phenomenal. It was so quiet. The Burj Khalifa wasn't even opened at that stage. But what I learned when I got to Dubai is that every single working resident in the country had one thing in common, was that they wanted a better life. And they had to give up the comfort zone. They had to give up family. They had to give up their friends, and they had to leave their home country for a better life. And that was what I loved about Dubai, is that everybody came there because they wanted more. They wanted more money. They wanted more freedom. They wanted more opportunities. And when you live in an environment like Dubai, you can actually see the city growing. Literally, you'll go down one freeway and tomorrow it won't exist. There'll be this giant overpass. There's one new bridge in Dubai that was built virtually overnight. It's called Waterfall Bridge. You go down Sheikh Zayed Road, there's 8 lanes, 4 lanes on each side, and then the bridge is a waterfall. So when the boats go under it, it's this cascading waterfall and you're driving over the river. It's phenomenal. And these things are growing all the time. So you start to get inspired. Where some of the places I've lived in Australia, nothing's changed in 30 or 40 years. The people are still the same. The shops are still the same. But Dubai, you could see it grow, and there's this buzz, there's this energy, there's this vibe about it, and it makes you stretch. And once I got into a leadership role at Emirates Airlines, I was like, wow, you can get some great education and you can get some great life experience.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So, Daniel, we spoke about the new breakthrough technology to improve leadership skills. Can you elaborate a little bit on this technology and how it works?
In 2016, I had started a new business. And one of the problems that I was finding in the marketplace is that people were lacking awareness. So I'd been through all this coach training, and I would say to my clients, what's blocking you? What's holding you back? And they'd say, I don't know. That's why I'm talking to you. Now, at that stage, if we were working with somebody, we would have to spend between 4 to 8 hours with a person just to do a detailed personal history to figure out what was wrong with them. But people say, I need to talk to you for 4 or 8 hours to figure out what the problem is. If it takes you that long to figure out, maybe you're not that good. Now, the market always tells the truth. The market always tells the truth. And I thought, that's a big problem. And so I met a workplace psychologist, and she said, Daniel, are you using science in your business? I said, science? I said, I'm in personal development. She says, yes, even more important. I said, well, what's the science? She said, today there's scientific reports that people can complete in 10 to 15 minutes, and it will reveal more to you than 20 years of self-discovery. And I said, I've never heard of it. I said, everything I'm doing is like on a piece of paper. And she said, try this. She let me try an assessment. I flew to America. I sat down in front of her, and in 60 minutes, I learned more about myself than all of those years traveling. And I said to her, I said, have you been spying on me? Have you tapped my phone? Do you have a video camera in my bedroom? Because I've been having that conversation with my wife. She said, Daniel, just do what successful people do. The science is available. You've got to use it. So I got this piece of technology, and it was called an emotional quotient assessment. I used it for myself, and I was like, my gosh, I can learn about myself so fast. I gave it to my wife, my family. I put it in the hands of about 100 of my clients. And they said, Daniel, this technology is phenomenal. This is a breakthrough. We've never had this breakthrough on our own. That following year, I helped more than 1,300 new clients learn more about their emotional intelligence. And I was mind blown and I wanted more. So I got the technology, I implemented in my business. And today we have more than 10,000 case studies. But what changed in 2020 was COVID. What changed was our use of artificial intelligence. What changed was big data and machine learning. And in 2020, another doctor, another scientist come and said to me, Daniel, did you know you can now use artificial intelligence to do this? I said, really? He said, but what makes it better? He says, the new way, instead of taking a test, which is the old way, the new way is to do a 90-second voice recording. And so I sampled the technology, it recorded my voice for 90 seconds, and it revealed to me all these personality strengths that I'd never known about. It also helped me to have breakthroughs that I'd never, ever had in the past. And so today, what we do is we learn about people's emotional intelligence and their inner potential by listening in to their voice. And that was the technology that you experienced just a couple of hours ago.
Absolutely. Yeah, a couple of hours ago, I recorded my voice, and then I got an email back saying that it's been done. And so let's delve into that and see what insights you got out of that.
Beautiful. Well, one of the things we say today is that just trust in science. The science has been done, and if we just do what other successful people do, we'll get the same result. And if you think about what a doctor does, when you go and sit down in front of a doctor, the doctor does an initial examination. Now, the doctor just doesn't use their intuition. They trust in science. So as you mentioned before, people have to go and have x-rays, they have blood tests, they have MRIs, because the doctor wants to trust in that science. So imagine an x-ray. An x-ray can see through your skin and it can see bones and joints, and it can see things that the naked eye cannot. But it's looking at physical things. Where the mind report, this is an x-ray into your mindset. Nobody on this earth can see people's mindset. You can see their behaviors, but you can't see the mindset. So the technology with the AI and the machine learning and the big data can now see your mindset. It shows you your personality strengths, what causes stress, and it also reveals the level of energy in the 7 energy centers or chakras in the body. So the first thing that we always look at when we've got these reports is we want to have a look at stress. Now, just across the pond in Australia, the cost of stress to the Australian community is $14 billion per year. That's $500 per year for every man, woman, and newborn child. And at a local hospital that we work with here, when somebody walks through that front door, the doctor always says, this person has stress. And the data shows that about 84% of illnesses today are psychosomatic in nature. It's from stress. It's from the mind causing the body illness. So the first thing we look at is stress types. Now, there's 3 types of stress, and all of us will fit into one of these 3 categories. We can have what's called logical stress. We can have compound stress, or we can have sentimental stress. Logical stress is about work, finance, our careers, money, urgent, pressing health matters, all those things that are happening right now in the moment. The other one is compound stress. Compound stress is the type of stress that builds up over time, little bit by little bit by little bit, and eventually you explode like a time bomb. And the third type of stress is what we call sentimental stress. And that has to do with everything in the past, specifically related to things with a heartbeat. So if you have sentimental stress, you get stressed about people, pets, you're very good with people, but you worry about the past. It's hard to let it go. So when you completed your mind report, the first thing that I saw was that you had really high logical stress. So this type of stress is cognitive. It's immediate. It's happening now. And what I wrote down before you shared it with me was that for you, there's going to be a level of mental exhaustion. There's going to be a level of focus. It's a real troubled focus. How do I remain focused right now? And also worry about money and potential a loss of career or your income stream. And so I see really high logical stress for you right now. Does that make sense to you?
It does. Yeah, I'm currently going through a restructure, and it's my 24th in my career. And yeah, um, there has been stress around the money side of it, absolutely, and career. And in terms of exhaustion, because I'm working and I'm also doing podcasting, so I'm getting up early in the morning, doing discovery calls during it's like 7 o'clock in the morning when I get to work, and then working a full day, coming home and doing podcast episodes. But what I've done is I've blocked out certain days where I don't do anything and I just focus on myself. And I've got into a practice over the last 6 months, 6 to 9 months around meditation and really getting, clearing my mind, going for a walk. So like yesterday, I did a 10 kilometer walk. Today, I've done a 6 kilometer walk. So really just going out to nature and releasing it. Yeah.
Wow. One of the things we know about people with logical stress, they lose sleep over finance. They feel anxious about the future, but they never break a sweat about people.
Mm.
They're so good with people. And that's one of the strengths with logical stress people. All the worry and concern is related with things, not relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Although
And
I would say that I'm not anxious at the moment, although maybe subconsciously I am.
after
But
24 times, you've almost mastered it.
exactly, it's got the t-shirt many times.
And I've never heard that before. I've never heard somebody going through 24 restructures. But when I look at the data here on the stress type, it makes so much sense. Through our time before we went live today, you never mentioned stress about people. It was just about career. And a lot of these things are at arm's length. They're out of our control. And so over the time, it's like you've mastered people, and what's going to happen with business is going to happen with business. And you just got to deal with it in the moment.
That's right. Yeah. And as Eckhart Tolle says, we live in the present moment. That's all we have. The past was a present moment. The future's a present moment. So that's what like I said, the last 9 months, my focus has been the present moment. Don't worry about what's happening tomorrow. Just focus on today. Yeah.
You've got a really fascinating mind report, because when we look at logical stress, we then have a look at personality. And when it comes to your personality trait, you're less of somebody who worries about things because you're so good with people. Your personality style is what we call the Guardian. The Guardian is the same personality type as Prince Harry, Marilyn Monroe, and also myself. So you and I have the Guardian personality, which is bizarre because most people would think you're so good with people, your focus is on people. Wouldn't that bring you stress? For a lot of people, the answer would be yes, but for you, it's no. And that's
No.
your fascinating dynamic. You could spend time with people all day and you won't lose sleep over that. And it's such a rare combination. So in preparation for this, I said, you're going to have a real love for people.
Mm.
You're also going to be a real people watcher. You're going to watch people's behaviors. You're going to pull apart the decisions they're making. You're going to think, how did that decision lead to this action? Did it get the result or not? That's part of the champion's mindset, isn't it? It's just watching and learning. And the other thing that I wrote down here is that before we met, I believe that you'd be a great motivator of people,
Yeah,
that you know
absolutely.
how to press people's buttons. You know how to get them from procrastination to motivation, and for them just, dribbling, wanting for more.
Yeah, and that's precisely why I started this podcast, because I went through a coaching journey last year where I was coaching, and my end goal has never been to be a full-time coach. It's to be a change influencer and a public speaker. And through the podcast, I can be a change influencer. And I'm doing Toastmasters at the moment to hone that skill of being a public speaker and be able to then travel the world and be able to speak. And I'd like to share a little story. So about 7 years ago, I remember sitting in my lounge here, New Year's Eve, and I was just crying out to God, universe, going, "What's my purpose? Why am I here?" And I had been listening to Jay Shetty's On Purpose podcast, and the sun had gone down. It was dark in the room, and I remember uh, clearly. It's almost like my TV lit up with a photo on the screen, and I saw myself standing on a stage speaking to a multitude of people. And on one side of the stage, I had coaches and consultants, mentors working with me. On the other side, I had the consultants. And on the stage with me were all the greats like Joe Shetty and Lewis Howes and Tony Robbins. All these people were on the stage with me. And so my vision is to be, uh, in the future, is to be in that in, motivating and inspirational environment. And as Gandhi said, be the change in the world that you want to see. And that's how I live my life. And Dr. Joe Dispenza also says that if you want to be a new version of yourself, you've got to change. And if you can't be the same person and expect to be able to change. And so that is who I've become, is that every opportunity I see, a chance or opportunity for me to change myself to become a new, better version, I take it straight away.
Mm.
And over the last, I would say, last 18 months, I've developed a reputation of being called instant implementer. So I don't procrastinate. I see something, I do it.
I love it. That makes so much sense when we have a look at your energy centers as well. All of that aligns with your energy.
Mm.
And people like Dr. Joe Dispenza, I love his work. And I think for all of us, when we change our energy, we change our life. And we've got to figure out, first of all, and that's when I went traveling, what is my energy? What is it that I want to do? And where do I need to position myself? And I can see here, just from these first two parts of the mind report, you're perfectly positioned. Because with the Guardian style, when people look at you, they say, this guy's reliable, this guy's trustworthy. And this is the first impression. This is what people see. And you can't hide it. These are things like the cover of a book. It just calls out to the world. This is the cover. For you, you're always well prepared. And I know that because in preparation for the podcast, you sent me this beautiful long list of all the things that you wanted to talk about. And I'll tell you what, from a guest perspective, that's awesome. We love that. And I know that when I see that, this person's a real thinker. What's this experience I want people to have? I want to be well prepared, and also I want them to be well prepared. The other key trait with the Guardian personality, it's perseverance. And it was that quote I shared before, fall down 7 times, get back up 8. How many people, this is a question for the audience, how many people do you know who's had 24 career restructures and still has a smile on their face at 8 p.m. at night? Still pursuing their passion without any guarantees of success. And when I look at your Guardian style, it's so true for you with what you're doing. And I think it's an incredible match. And how this personality style is developed, it's developed through making mistakes and being punished for mistakes when we're younger. So what happens is we learn through mistakes, but we get punished for making a mistake when we're younger. And this is what develops that Guardian personality. So for me, Anthony, when I had my learning disabilities, my music teacher was about 6'5". He had this big chest, this big billowing voice. And every time I made a mistake, you just scream. And then if I made a mistake at home, I get a rap over the knuckles. And then at school, when I made a mistake, the teachers gave me a verbal lashing. And so what I learned was mistakes are painful. And so when you learn that mistakes are painful, what's the antidote? You are always over prepared. So super preparation.
Yeah, I remember a manager of mine when I was doing sales repping years ago. I think it was back in 2004, and we were driving somewhere to another town, and he said, "Anthony, do you know what a mistake is?" And I said, "That's when you do something bad." And that was my perception of a mistake back then. And he said, "No, it's not." He says, "When you make a movie, you have a lot of mistakes." I said, "Oh yeah." He says, "Yeah, but eventually you get the right take and you make a multi-million-dollar movie." He says that's what mistakes are. So you just keep failing, making mistakes, and you keep learning.
Anthony, this is where I had my breakthrough in 2020. I'd been seeing a lot of coaches. I'd been attending a lot of personal development courses, but I never felt that I had my breakthrough. I never felt I had it. And I remember hiring one coach. It was 1,750 US dollars per hour. And the coach said to me, "There's nothing wrong with you." Oh, thanks. But I knew within me there was a blockage, and I didn't know enough about my personality. And when I had a look at these potential challenges in my personality style, and I saw this fear of making a mistake, it's also the perfectionist attitude. And so when we're young and we make a mistake, the first person to punish us is going to be mum and dad. Secondly, it's going to be grandmother and grandfather. Thirdly, it becomes our teachers.
Mm,
And then when we get into the big world and we start driving and we drive too fast, the police or the government punish us. But once we're 18 and we're living our own life, there's nobody left to punish you. And so the equation flips around and we start to go into self-harm. Well, if these people aren't here to punish me, I'm a bad boy, I've still got to be punished. And what I had problems with for a long time was self-harm and a lot of
mm,
very negative self-talk. What I would say to myself inside of my head about myself, no human would ever speak those words to somebody else. But that was the self-harm cycle, and I couldn't articulate it. I wasn't even consciously aware of it before the age of 40. And I had my breakthrough when the scientist said, "Daniel, this is a big problem. Do you ever see yourself as a perfectionist?" "No, I'm Daniel Danger, former Australian champion athlete, entrepreneur, D style in disc, low C style." He went, "We're not talking about that. We're talking about a fear of making a mistake." And that really awakened me. And as soon as I got that awareness, we say in emotional intelligence, if you can't name it, you can't tame it. And I couldn't name this problem for 40 years. But as soon as I recognized it, I named it. Now I can move forward.
mm.
And that's what
Yeah,
I got.
absolutely. Yeah, so good.
Now, you were mentioning before, and I find this technology so fascinating because what I wrote down here when I was having a look at your energy centers, your third eye energy center, which sits about here, it says that you have great insight and mental clarity. Your throat chakra, which sits here, is also balanced. And it says that you're going to be a very clear communicator. Also, your heart chakra is a little bit high. We've got to be a little bit careful of trying to keep everybody happy. Your solar plexus energy center is balanced, which means you're going to have a lot of confidence. And your sacral chakra, creative expression, which I believe you're doing through here on the podcast and your future speaking, all of this is in alignment of becoming a speaker and
Mm,
somebody who's being creative using their voice as an instrument. So what I had here was that This gentleman is going to speak very clearly. He's going to be very thorough in what he says. And when he shares an idea, he's going to share this idea very easily. And the source of his confidence is coming from within. His confidence in himself. He's confident in his own sexuality. And when he expresses himself, because of your root, your sacral chakras balance, that it's going to be in a very creative way. And that to me lined up with exactly what you were talking about before, being on stage with the greats. Tony Robbins, Jay Shetty, Jay Abraham, Dr. Joe Dispenza. All of this is a perfect fit. And it's so rare to see somebody with such balanced chakras, which tells me you've done a lot of work on yourself.
Absolutely. Absolutely. My self-development journey has been ongoing since I was 26 years old. And in the last year and a half, or a year and 9 months, it's been on steroids. And been through multiple rounds over the last few years of trauma healing and letting go of the stories that I made up, the things that I held on to. And I want to encourage everyone who's listening to this, everything happens for you, not to you. And you have the power to create and be whoever you want to be. You've just got to believe in yourself and back yourself. And that's what I did, Daniel, is at a very young age, I backed myself and believed myself. You're looking at someone who at school never passed any subjects, never went to university, had no qualifications, and I've worked my way up to where I am today as a business partner, relationship manager within a large council organization. And what you were talking about, relationships and being able to speak and trust and all of that stuff. I recently came into this organization 4 months ago, and within 3 to 4 months, I've literally gained the respect and trust of all of the general managers that I work with, that I look after. And it's purely by just being me, not being someone else, just being my authentic self, being my true self, and speaking up. That's one of the things that I used to struggle with. I've sung for years. I was a singer, done a little bit of acting, but early this year, I found it really hard to get in front of a camera and talk. So what I did was I scared myself silly by making a challenge for myself on New Year's Eve that I was going to do 31 Facebook Lives in my Facebook group. And I showed up every single day. I didn't care who was online or not. I showed up, and I started off with like 5-minute Facebook Lives. By the end, I was doing an hour-long Facebook Live with no preparation. So I'm living proof and testament that if you apply yourself, if you really have a vision, you really have a hunger to be someone, let go of the things that are holding you back and just break out of your comfort zone, because I believe in living in your uncomfortable zone permanently, because that's where growth happens.
Yep.
And that's where you become a champion.
Yep. Wow. And you can see it in the science. The science supports all of that. The third eye, the throat, the solar plexus, the sacral plexus chakra, all balanced. And that has a significant impact on our mental and emotional health also. When we have a very low solar plexus chakra and a very active third eye chakra, what we have is we have all these visions of this amazing future, but we never take action on it. People who have an overactive throat chakra, they talk a big game, but if their solar plexus chakra is too low, they never act on it. But the magic starts to happen when they're balanced, and then you position yourself in an organization or in a situation where all of your natural strengths fit that role. And this is a beautiful chakra balance. And you mentioned trauma. What was the trauma you went through? Because I had a couple of notes here in red, which you'll see later on. because I suspected something here, but I just didn't know what it was.
Sure. So when I was 5 years old, my parents separated through family interference, and it's quite common in India. And at the age of 7, I was sent to an ashram, a boarding school in India, which was literally cross between army and prison. And it was so regimented. Barbed wire fences, you weren't allowed out. I saw my father maybe once a year, maybe once because he was traveling the world. And I never knew my mum until I was 21 years old. So I grew up with this story. I grew up with this belief that no one loved me, that no one cared about me, and I was abandoned and I was rejected because I was literally dropped at the boarding school at the
Mm.
ashram, and then the driver went away, and I was there for 6 years in that boarding school. So over the years in relationships, or as I started to get into dating and relationships and so on, that pattern just kept repeating where I didn't know how to show love. I didn't know how to show affection. I remember watching my younger brother and how he was with his girlfriend to learn how to be romantic, how to be affectionate. I remember saying to my mum when I was 20, I think it was about 30 something, for the first time, telling my mum, I love you, you know? And so I've had lots of mistakes in relationships, and some relationships that have broken up. Although last year and also early this year, and I'm going to call out someone, Sim, you know who you are. This lady came into my life because I was like worried about income, and I didn't have any work early this year, and I was freaking out, and I'm like, universe, God, what am I doing? What am I going to do? Next minute, I get a message on Messenger, and this lady says, do you know anyone who's looking for a flatmate? And I'm like, I've got a spare room that's free. So she came and stayed with me for 12 weeks. And during this 12 weeks, she took me through, because she does frequency healing and so on, and she's a coach as well. And she took me through a 12-week journey of helping me, keeping me accountable, and helping me with the whole chakra rebalancing, everything. And to a point where I remember when I got this role at the council, what they came to me with an amount in terms of salary, I could have easily gone, oh yeah, I'll take that. And I remember this person sitting right across from me and said, no, you won't. You're worth more than that. And I had to search deep within and go, yes, I am worthy. And I remember telling this person, I'm actually worth more than this. What is the end of the range? What is the end of the range? And he gave me a figure, and I said, give me that. And he came back and I said, no, give me that. And he came back and he said 5K short of what I asked for. And he said, by the way, in September, you'll get a pay rise and you'll get to that range. And just this weekend, I received an email saying I'm over that amount now. So, all of this was self-worth. All of this was like me beating myself up and going, I'm not worthy of this. I'm not, And I also remember at the age of 15, someone really dear to me who's now passed said to me, because some stuff that went on in the family, said to me, you're useless. You'll never be a singer. You'll never amount to anything. And I tried to kill myself. I tried to cut myself and kill myself. And years later, I remember that person coming to a concert because I started taking singing lessons. I sang in church and so on. And he came to this concert and bawled his eyes out. And from that day, he was my biggest supporter. And in 2008, I represented New Zealand in a world contest in Las Vegas. and placed 8th in the world. So, so that's the journey, the trauma. But yeah, it took a lot to let go of that belief that I was abandoned, that I was rejected, and also forgive my parents, forgive myself for creating that story. Dr. Gabor Mate says something really interesting. I was listening to an episode one day. He said, what happened was definitely a traumatic situation, but holding on to it is what you call trauma. And he said, living a life of authenticity heals all that. And this year has been all about living a life of authenticity, being able to speak out my truth and challenge people when I know that I need to speak up, and I have.
It's fascinating because everything that you're sharing there, when I look at the data and the science, it all aligns. When we have these traumatic experiences, sometimes it can be imprinted upon our DNA, and then it sticks there for a very long time. So a couple of things that I had here is that was that at this time there's been a sense of confusion. Also, with the heart chakra being overactive, when there's been a lot of heartbreak, then we lose balance in that energy center. And so you had some interesting stories there about how you were brought up, mother sent to the boarding school, this person who tells you all the things that you're not going to do with your life. And when we see that high crown chakra, what happens is sometimes we feel disconnected from the source. And we say to the gods, you've just given me the toughest hand in the world, and now you've done this. And it's very easy to disconnect. So I can see there that depression, insomnia, and people pleasing have been things that really impacted your DNA over the years in this
Absolutely.
lifetime.
Absolutely. In my 20s and late 20s and early 30s, I went through borderline depression, but I was always able to pull myself back. I've
Yep.
always been that way. And definitely people pleasing was something that I came to the realization back in 2022. And I remember reading this book called The Way of the Superior Man by David Dida, and it completely changed my life. It was the first book I've ever read, and now I have a bookshelf full of books that I read. But that was the first book I read, and it completely changed my life. And it taught me about following my purpose in life. And here I am following my purpose in life.
And 8th in the world. Incredible.
Yeah,
Incredible.
yeah.
So they're the insights that I wanted to share with you from the Mind Report. And I'm going to share this 8-page report so you can read through. And there's so much more content. You're gonna link it all together. You're going to connect all the dots. And I believe that with this technology, it gives us insights and breakthroughs that we haven't been able to have on our own. And that's why I say just trust in science. Today, we've got all the technology, and we have hospitals using this technology. You know, we were meeting with a group of doctors recently, and they said, Daniel, when people come to the hospital, they have stress, anxiety, and fatigue. And if you could help us with those problems, then we're going to have healthier people. Because if we're not sleeping correctly, we're fatigued. And the number one cause of negative emotions is fatigue. We need to have a lot of sleep to be able to balance out our bodies. In the morning, based on our circadian rhythm, one of the first things that happens in the morning is that we naturally want to defecate. First thing in the morning, when we wake up, we should be defecating. And the reason why we defecate from a Chinese medicine perspective is that when we sleep, our brain's flushing out all the toxic emotions and thoughts. And then they go down the chakras to what's called the toxic waste department, the waistline, and they want to be excreted. But unfortunately, because the foods we eat, the way that we live our life, the fatigue, our normal bowel movements are storing all that toxicity in the body, and it's not escaping. So with this type of technology, it gives you a breakthrough that most people can't have on their own.
Absolutely. And I remember my father saying to me years ago, because I used to suffer from constipation, and it's a personal thing, but
Well, that would make sense because your root chakra is
yeah,
overactive, and everybody with an overactive root chakra has or is suffering from constipation,
yeah, yeah.
my father included.
I don't now, but I used to really badly. And my father used to say to me, "Son, if you don't, defecate regularly, then it affects your mood as well." And have you ever, if for those listening, if you ever noticed that when you haven't been to the loo, that you feel sluggish, you feel down, you feel, it just drags you down. And it's so important to move. When you move your body, if you can't get a good night's sleep, at least go and move your body, because what I find after exercise, you're definitely going to move your
Get the bowels working.
bowels. That's the one. That's right. The bowels. I didn't know what to say there, but the bowels,
Call it
absolutely.
my kids call it the poo tube.
Peter,
Like
yeah,
YouTube.
yeah. So Daniel, with this report, I mean, the listeners and people watching this episode, they may be interested in getting in touch with you and doing this test themselves. Uh, what are the options we've got to do that? You know,
The best option is go to my website, danieltolson.com. When you get there, top right-hand side, it'll say Mind Report, and everybody's favorite word is free. It's Mind Report free. And all you've got to do is click that link, schedule a session, do your voice recording 90 seconds, and I'll personally take you through your report like I've done for Anthony today. I'll unpack it, I'll prepare it, I'll give you an 8-page report, and I'll get you on your way. And that's how simple it is. It's free. Go and do it. We normally charge $750 working with our clients, but for 5 of your guests, they'll get it for free.
yeah. And is there somewhere they can maybe? Do they need to put any words or in there? Or they just click on it?
Yep. When you click on it, it'll say, how did you find out about me? What podcast? Make sure you put the Champion Mindset Collective podcast so we know where you're coming from, and we know that we've got 5 allocated for you.
Awesome. Thank you, Daniel.
Phenomenal. And it only takes 90 seconds. Doesn't matter
Absolutely.
if your voice is croaky, doesn't matter what language or what languages you speak. You can start in English. You can then do it in Hindi. You can do it in any language. You can do it in Tagalog, Chinese. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
We're just listening to the brainwave frequencies.
Yeah. And just as I found out, if you're trying to do it on your phone and it doesn't upload, or on another browser, try Chrome and Firefox, because those ones will definitely work. There are certain browsers that will block you from uploading things. So Chrome and Firefox will work perfectly for you. All
Nice
right,
and
Daniel,
simple.
let's move on with some more insights from you. So based on your experience of co-leading a team of 17,500 cabin crew, that's a lot of people at Emirates Airlines. What are some of the key leadership lessons that you learned that can be applied into businesses of any size?
Well, the number one thing for me is that you can actually walk into any room and you can lead anybody. That's the truth. All leadership skills are learnable. And there's no such thing as a born leader. No doctor pulls the baby out of the womb and holds it to the lights and says, this is a natural born leader. The doctor says, this baby, this beautiful baby can become anything that it wants. And the truth is you can learn any skill to achieve any goal. And if you want to become a leader, there's been more than 3,000 studies on leadership. Leadership is a skill that can be learned. If you can ride a bike, you can learn to lead a team. And the biggest takeaway from me working with such a big team is that you've got to remember that people are complex. You've also got to remember that people are different. And there's no such thing as a one-size-fits-all approach to leadership. For most of us, we grew up in families where they said, treat others the way you want to be treated. Now, that sounds nice, it's biblical, but I'm Daniel and I'm aggressive. I'm competitive. And if I was to treat everybody around me competitively, I would see everybody as a competition, everybody as an enemy. I want to win, which means you've got to lose. You can't approach people like that. So what we have to remember is we have to treat people the way that they want to be treated, which means you've got to spend time with people like we did today. This is what leaders do. This is what coaches do. You sit down and you figure out who people are. Then you say, what do you want me to do to get the most out of you? And then we position you in an area where you can use all of your natural talents. Perfect example. You said you were singing. I worked with a gentleman at Emirates Airlines and I heard him speaking. And I said, oh my gosh. I said, your voice. I said, it sounds like I'm listening to the television. And he said, Daniel, he said, I actually do professional voiceovers in Arabic. And I gave him the PA and I said, for this flight, you're doing all of the PAs. And he did it. He felt so good. And we got compliment after compliment from customers, from first to business to economy class saying, who's the voice? And I said, this guy's on television. So people are complex and people are different. And we've just got to learn about people and we've got to give them what they want. Do that and you can walk into any room and lead anybody.
Absolutely. Yeah, I totally agree with you. Yeah. It's about building a rapport with people and really building the trust. Once you build the trust with people, they will relax. Yeah. And, people are always trying to suss you out as well. So be authentic, be yourself.
I knew my crew would suss me out. And I'd say to them, I want two things from you. And they'd look at me and I'd say, I just want two things. And they'd say, what's that? And I'd say, number one on this flight, keep it safe. The most important people on this flight are the crew. Keep yourself safe because if you're injured, you can't help anybody else. And for them, they were mind blown because most leaders don't think about the teams. They think about the customer. They put the customer first. Customer comes second. The team comes first. If you've got a happy team, they're going to spread that happy vibe to the customer and the customer is going to be taken care of as a byproduct. So you've got to keep the crew safe. Then they'd say, what's second? I'd say, well, if you've got to keep it safe, you've got to keep it sexy. And they'd laugh and I'd say, well, what's sexy? And I'd say, girls, make sure you wear your big red lipstick. Make sure the eyebrows are on. Make sure the makeup's on. Gentlemen, make sure the shirts are tucked in and smile in the cabin. I said, if you smile, you can get away with anything. If you smile at a customer and you make a mistake, you'll get away with it. And they would roar in laughter. They'd say, Daniel, what are we going to do? I'd say two things. Keep it safe and keep it sexy. And that's what they wanted. I gave it to them. And life for me as a leader was very easy. I think I had one conflict. I had no customer complaints. Customers would write to the company. I had this leader, Daniel Tolson. This is the feedback. Manager would ring me. What are you doing? I'm like, just my job. They're like, you're doing it good. The crew would actually swap flights and come to my flight. So if you had a 2:00 in the morning Delhi flight, which nobody wanted to go on, they would swap their New York flight to come to Delhi with me. And they'd say, Daniel, I heard you're such a great leader that if I flew on this flight with you, I'd have a great time. And people would write to me and they still tell me today, you're one of the best leaders. They said, because of you, I didn't want to leave. Because of you, I wanted to stay. And that's how I knew I made an impact.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it's so true, so true. Absolutely. So Daniel, you've worked with over 25,000 leaders. That's a lot of leaders. What are some of the common challenges that you've observed and how do you help these leaders overcome them?
For leaders, the first thing is everybody wants to become a better leader. I've never met a leader who says, I want to get worse. They all want to get better. And when I was with Emirates Airlines, the first thing that I did every day when I met my crew for the very first time, I'd get 17 people I'd never met. I'd have to get them working together on a $500 million aircraft and get the customers safe from Dubai to somewhere else in the world. And so every flight I would ask them, what is your special skill? And the first time I asked people, They'd make eye contact, then they'd break eye contact. And they'd look away and I'd say, what's on the roof? What are you looking for? They'd say, I don't know how to answer that question. So leaders, you have to figure out what your special skill is. That's your job. And then your job is to go and tell the people that you work with what your special skill is. And when I was with Emirates Airlines, yes, I was a leader. It said it on my badge, senior flight steward. But I was just the same as all other leaders until I announced my special skill. And there was one flight, we were flying to Beijing, and the captain came into the room and he said, what's your special skill? And I said to the captain, I said, beyond the uniform, I'm a life coach. And he said, a life coach? He said, well, make sure you come up to the cockpit later on and I'll talk to you about my marriage. And I said, okay, I'll be there. Anyway, we're boarding all the customers. We had some technical problems with the air bridge, and the air bridge dropped about a foot. And one of the customers immediately had a panic attack. Now, when a customer is stuck on the air bridge, they're kind of in no man's land. They don't belong to the airport and the ground staff. They don't really belong to the crew on the aircraft. They're in no man's land. And this person's having a panic attack and we couldn't get them out. And the captain remembered, I've got a life coach here. And he called me and he said, Daniel, come to L1, come to first class. We have a customer who's having a panic attack. He said, you're a life coach. It's your time to shine. And what he meant is we had to make a promise, Najum. Najum is about being a shining sky in the star. And so I came to life. I walked out on the air bridge. I sat down on the air bridge. Thousands of people have walked across it with their dirty shoes. And I sat down there and I coached the client through their panic attack. I coached them on the way to the aircraft, through business class, all the way down to economy. I kept her emotionally and psychologically safe all the way to Beijing. And she had the best time of her life. And so the only reason my senior could utilize my special skill was that I announced it. And this is what all leaders have to do. You have to be able to articulate your special skill and then tell others what it is. That's your job. And do that, and you'll make people's life easy. Like my captain, he knew where to go and use his resources.
Yeah, I'd say agree. It's so important. You've got to absolutely, share your special skill, because all of us are different and we all have a special skill. So, yeah. All right. So last two questions before we go into the quick fire questions. Could you please explain the concept of the 5 pillars of emotional intelligence and why they're so crucial for long-term business success?
EQ is a buzzword. It's probably got a bad name. You've probably heard about it in some corporate meeting and you've still got no idea what it is. And that's when I first heard of it. I'm like, oh, that sounds like a lot of bullshit. But what I realized it really was, emotional intelligence is about being street smart. That's all it is. It's being street smart. And the first pillar of emotional intelligence is self-awareness. And street smart people understand why they think and feel the way that they do. This is not about your IQ. This is about how well you know yourself. The second pillar of emotional intelligence is self-regulation. And this is your ability to get out of any mental rut or dead end that you find yourself in. It's like your experience. You've been through 24 turnarounds in the business, 24 repositionings, and what happens is you just get on with it. You just keep moving forward. And we've got to learn how to do that. Most people get stuck in a rut, stuck in a comfort zone, and they're there for the majority of their career, wishing and hoping they'd done something else. The third pillar of emotional intelligence is not the Tony Robbins jump up and down. It's not the T. Harv Eker high five, you've got a millionaire mind. It's the Mike Tyson model of motivation. It's getting punched in the face and you still move forward. It's about getting knocked down and getting back up. And they're the 3 first pillars. They have everything to do with you. The other 2 pillars are social awareness. And this is where leadership takes place. Social awareness is understanding why you, my team, think and feel the way that they do. Imagine having a leader who didn't know anything about you. Imagine a leader who didn't know what your superpower was. Most people are going, yeah, I can imagine that. I've got one now. And the truth is most people in a career right now, 50% of them would be willing to fire their leader. The other 50% are willing to fire the business and go and work somewhere else. So we have to lead with empathy. As we said before, people are complex. People are unique. You might get this person for 35, 40 hours a week. What's happening in the other areas of their life? What were those childhood experiences that created this person today? And then fifthly, it's social regulation. It's your ability to speak and to get others listening. And we've all had leaders who speak, and you look around the room and nobody's listening. So you've got to become a great communicator. And when you master emotional intelligence, the world really opens up and you start to attract a better future.
Mm. It's so true. I've experienced lots of toxic leadership in my career,
Those ones who
and
forgot to poop, they should have taken
yeah,
your dad's advice.
yeah, and also not being able to show empathy. And what I learned was that they can't show empathy because they don't know how to show empathy for themselves, you know.
You
And
can't pour from an empty cup.
exactly. So, and whatever you reflect out is what's inside, and then you get that back. So we've got to be so careful what we are putting out, the energy that we're putting out to the world. And if it's kindness and empathy, and as I was telling telling a workmate today, you don't have to like someone, but you should love them. You choose to love them because we choose to love each other, but we don't have to like them, you know.
Mm.
But it's also speak your truth. If you're if you're if you feel you're not being heard, then speak up, speak your truth. Yeah. Your your emphasis on and importance on goal setting and leadership. What advice do you have for leaders who struggle with starting and achieving their clear goals?
The biggest thing is that the first type of leadership is what we call personal leadership. And that's about getting results for yourself. And I think most people can get results for themselves. But strategic leadership is about getting results through other people. So as a leader, a good leader, a good manager can delegate work to 300 people and manage all of that. Now, if you want people to do the work, you've got to stop thinking about what's in it for you. And you've got to start to think about what's in it for them. Because people, when you ask them to do something, the first thought is, well, what's in it for me? And if you can't answer that question, they won't have any motive or desire to take action. You know, we've seen these posters from the time of World War II, and it used to say, don't ask what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. Well, in business, what happens is business owners, business managers say, don't ask what the company can do for you. We're going to ask what you can do for the company. But people say, what's the company going to do for me? We've seen these memes on the internet. Boss rocks up in a brand new Lamborghini, a Range Rover, and says, if you work hard again next year, I'll be able to buy another one. People are sick of that. They say, I'm a human. I have my own hopes and dreams and ambitions. I want to start a family. I want financial freedom too. What can you do for me? And that's how we think. That's how we should be thinking as leaders.
Mm,
If we want to set a goal, what's in it for the other people? And if there's nothing in it for them, there's no buy-in. And if there's no buy-in, there's no action. And so we've got to get clear on that. And as you mentioned before, it's empathy. I've got to understand these people, their wants and needs, their desires. What are their hopes? What are their fears? What's their stress type? What keeps them up at night time? And if I can figure out what they want and first of all help them, then I've got a damn good chance that they're going to chip in and help us. So
mm,
start with thinking like the team member. What's in it for me?
mm,
And if you can answer that, you'll get the help.
totally, totally. All right, let's. jump into the quick fire questions. And Daniel, these can be one word or they could be a sentence. So whatever works for you. First question is, how do you define success, and has that definition changed for you over time?
It hasn't changed. It's still the same. It's all about living life on my terms. I want to be able to do what I want when I want. I want to do it how I want, and I don't want to ask anybody for permission.
Mm. Mm. Yeah. Question two, who has been your greatest inspiration and why?
My second greatest inspiration is a gentleman by the name of Brian Tracy. That book my first boss gave to me, and he wrote in it, Danny boy, this is the blueprint of success. That was a book by Brian Tracy. I traveled the world with that book. I hired Brian Tracy as my personal coach. I went into business and owned one of his franchises, and I was also his rookie business coach of the year globally. So he's the second greatest inspiration.
Great man. Yeah, he's a great man.
Lovely
All
guy.
right. Lovely guy. Yeah, absolutely. I think recently he's also uh, been working with a lady that I know she's Australian as well, Australian Chinese, and it's the 100, what is it? 100 lunches. Have you read that book? Have you seen that book?
She's the speaking coach.
Speaking coach, yes. Yes. So I'm looking at, I've been thinking about getting her on the podcast as well. So yeah. So she's recently done some work with Brian Tracy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. He's a wealth of knowledge. And one of the things I really admire about Brian is what he teaches is all timeless truths.
Mm.
And he says that the ideas that he shares, every generation has to learn. And I used to train Brian's Eat That Frog. I used to train Perform at Your Best and all of his programs. And every generation really has to learn it. You know, you're not born with the skills of goal setting. You're not born with the skills of time management. You're not born with the skills of selling. And Brian says all skills are learnable. So also what that means is that you can achieve any goal if you're prepared to acquire the knowledge. And that's just a timeless truth from Brian.
Yeah. And that's the difference between having a fixed and a growth mindset, right? Because a fixed mindset says, I was born this way, I can't do this. Whereas a growth mindset says, I can learn this.
A leopard can't change its spots. You can't teach old dogs new tricks. Yeah.
I've taught a few old I've taught a few old dogs some new tricks. And a champion mindset is really, really taking your life into the next gear and going for it. So yeah. Right. So what is something that you believe in that others may disagree with?
Well, there's only one group of people who will disagree with that, and it'll be the victims. Only victims will disagree with that. And it's a quote from Brian Tracy. And he says, you are where you are and what you are because of who you are.
Yeah. Yep.
And all
Totally.
champions accept that reality. But all victims, they'll disagree with it. Oh, do you know how my parents treated me? I'm a victim. They're the perpetrator. And they blame people. They identify with their diagnosis. They rationalize and come up with all of these logical good reasons why they can't have what they want. But you're responsible for your own life.
Absolutely. So true. Yeah. Okay. Number 4, if you could go back and give your younger self one piece of advice, what would it be?
Don't tell yourself bullshit stories. Don't convince yourself that you can't do something that you're not enough. Just don't tell yourself bullshit stories.
Yeah, absolutely. And remember to defecate regularly.
Absolutely.
Get rid of that bullshit. All right, last one. What is one message that you'd like to share with the world?
Life gets better when you get better.
Mm,
Simple as that.
that is very true. Very true. Daniel, it's been amazing. I wasn't sure what to expect with this podcast interview, but I've had an amazing time. And thank you so much for joining the Champion Mindset Collective podcast today. If people have been listening to this or watching this episode and they would like to get in touch with you, what are some of the ways they could do that? Obviously, we talked about your website. What are some other ways? And Do you have any programs or anything that you're running at the moment?
Best bet, go to my website, danieltolson.com, and press the Mind Report button. That's the best way. Contact me through there. I'm spending less time on social media today than I have ever in the past. And the reason why that is that I've got big goals and aspirations, and it involves people. And we just started working with one of the biggest hospitals in our area, and we've got contracts there for the next couple of years to deliver Mind Report in a medical setting. So the people who are coming into the hospital, we're going to be helping them with their mental and emotional health. So come and talk to me personally. A lot of these conversations that we have as leaders, oftentimes we don't want our dirty laundry hung outside for everybody to see. So press that button, Mind Report. We'll have a conversation about you, your talents, your inner potential, and I'll show you how to use it. Come and spend 15 minutes with me.
Awesome. Thank you, Daniel. And I would love to get you back for some future episodes. I
100%.
would also like to invite you at some stage when you're ready to join me on a webinar, and let's unpack some of this and get some people on a call and really unpack it and go a bit deeper into this.
Let's do it.
One of the things that I have been getting out of these podcast episodes, now that I've released 42 episodes so far in something like 9 months. And
in a world where people quit after their 5th episode.
Yeah, absolutely. I just keep going. I was doing consistently 1 a week. Now I'm doing about 3 a week. My goal is to get to 2,000 episodes in 10 years. So, yeah. So
I've got a hot topic in my mind. One of the things that my wife and I have is a piece of technology called sound frequency therapy. And all the way back in 1920s, an advisor to the US Army by the name of Royal Rife introduced frequency therapies. And he had a 90% success rate for curing cancer back in the 1920s. And then they come and destroyed his technology. Well, we have frequency therapies today, and we're doing magical things with people in the health field, in the hospitals. And I would love to talk about frequency therapies. I know you've experienced some similar ones, and
yes.
I want to get this out to the world. I'd love to.
Absolutely. Let's book another episode and talk about the frequency technology. Absolutely. So thank you everyone for coming and listening to this episode or watching this episode. I encourage you to, if you've got some insights, if you've got some gold out of this, share this episode with your friends, family, and workmates. And if you haven't already done so, follow this podcast so you don't miss any future episodes and we can get this out to the wider world. And lastly, you are worthy and you are loved, and champion your life and champion your greatness. Have an amazing day.